So when we read the introduction to John for the very first time, it sounds really strange. In fact, even the 20th time it sounds strange. Who is this Word? And how can he be with God and also be God? And once we get it, it doesn't sound so strange, but it should. It should still sound weird. Because once we work out that the Word is part of the Trinity and that he's God himself, after that it makes sense that he's the light in the darkness and he lights up humanity. But it doesn't make sense where we read later in verse 10 that he's in the world. In the world. Now, at the moment we should be imagining God in all his glory on earth. And yet, we then read in verse 11, the world did not recognize him. How? How could that be when God in all his glory is standing there in front of them? And of course, we're not surprised because we've already got it. We already understand it. But imagine what it was like before you realized all that, before you realized the strange fact that Almighty God, creator of the universe, became a human like us. Have you ever made an ant farm? An ant farm. You get a jam jar or a big sweet jar, and you fill it with soil, or maybe maybe a fish tank. That would be better, or one of those thin things made just for an ant farm. And you put in sticks and things, and you put in perhaps a plant, and then you put in a colony of ants, only a small colony, and then they start digging. And it's fascinating seeing them make a world for themselves and going and working all the time and cooperating together. It can keep a modern child fascinated for, maybe even 10 minutes. And here's the hard bit. This is where you have to put your imagination into overdrive. Imagine that you start getting attached to those ants. And you start seeing, that's that reddish one there, I'll call him Fred. And that's that very hard-working one there, I'll call him Bert. And you start giving them names and you start getting attached to them. And then you see things are starting to go wrong. They're going all over the place. They're messing up their tunnels. They're not cooperating like they should do, like ants do. Perhaps because you forgot to put a queen in there, or something's gone wrong. And now you really have to shift your imagination into high gear. Imagine that you love these ants so much that you want to help them. And the only way is to become an ant yourself and go and show them, by living in that tank, how they should live. Perhaps you've seen the film Ants, where Arnie Schwarzenegger and Woody Allen are ants. Well, they're voiceovers ants. Woody Allen doesn't have enough physique even to be an ant. But they were playing these ants, and they were having a great time and having a very interesting life. Real ants are nothing like that. They spend their day carrying food. Well, when I say food, I mean gross lumps of unmentionable yuck, which they regard as food. They don't talk, they don't watch TV, they don't tell any jokes, they don't go to dinner parties. They just work and work and work. They have very little brains, only enough brain to work. So if you did become one of them, you would not only have a very dreary time, you would be thick. You wouldn't have any more brain capacity than they do because you're one of them, which would be really frustrating. And you'd even have difficulty remembering the names that you gave to these ants. Now you have an idea of what John is talking about. God came as Jesus, as a human. And when God became a human, he stepped down much further than us becoming ants. He had to limit his power, his foresight, his size, his knowledge. his mind, which previously had no limits, suddenly was constrained inside a human brain. His sight, which used to roam all over the universe, all through space and time, was now restricted to eyes. Here's another way of imagining it, what Jesus went through to. We can think of a computer game. Here's a lovely oldie, Wallace and Gromit and the Were-Rabbit. I don't know if you've ever played that. You have to catch all the rabbits who are ruining the vegetable patch. Lovely game. The world was created by a small firm here in Cambridge, a team of 40 programmers. There's a Christian friend of mine who was on the team, and it was his idea to include a church. A great idea. And you might recognise it. It's based on St Mary's in Hardwick. The church has been there for about 1,000 years, and it's now immortalised in a computer game. Well, of course, computer games come and go. They're rather ephemeral and people stop playing them. So I guess the church is going to long outlast the computer game. This game came out in 2006, which is ages ago now in terms of computers. But I have to go back that far in order to illustrate what it was like for Jesus to become such a minor creature as a human. Because nowadays, an AI called a Watson box can read scientific papers and come to decisions, come to conclusions based on them. Another AI, the GPT-2, can write creative stories. You just give it an opening sentence and it will carry on, and it comes up with completely unexpected stories out of what you give it. Or there's the game playing, Mu Zero. It's completely self-taught. No one has ever taught it how to play a game, and yet it can play pretty much every game on the planet and beat you. Now, of course, there's no AI yet that can do all those things, but that's just a matter of time. So we have to go back a long way in the computer world to find something that we can compare to the Incarnation. Actually, I like the other game that came out to that same team in Cambridge here. The Wallace and Gromit team also made the Roller Coaster Tycoon. Fantastic game. It was very sophisticated for its time. You could create your own theme park, you could put in rides, you could put in food outlets, and then you wait for the peeps. Now the peeps are the little people, crowds of them, and each of them know what they want to do. They've each got their own little AI. My daughter Joanne made a family of peeps just like us. Peeps are all different. They come in different sizes, ages, and they have, to a limited extent, they have different personalities. And some of them like excitement. Some of them avoid the scary rides. And they're sick if they go on a ride too soon after eating. And because they've all got independent AI, they interact with each other. And just like real people, they walk around the park, they try out rides, they eat food which isn't good for them. They live on the screen, and you can see what they're doing. And you can even see what they're saying to each other, seeing what they're feeling. They feel hunger, or they're excited, or they're tired, or they're annoyed. They even talk. They talk to each other. And you can see what they're saying to each other on the screen. The words come up. You can even see what they're thinking, even though they're not saying it out loud. Now, here's a point where the peep, like my wife Enid, decides to turn to her family and take a photograph. And you can see what she says. She says, "Say cheese!" And you can see what they're all thinking. And you can see that the peep that's like me is thinking, "You've got your finger over the lens, isn't that typical?" Well, but I'm thinking it. I didn't say it out loud, so clearly the program's got it wrong, and it's made me more tactful than I really am. And as we watch, we can see my wife, as we're going through the park, she's getting annoyed because she can't find a coffee shop. And as we continue around the fair, you can see that I'm thinking, "Oh, this is a bit tedious." But my daughters, they're still excited. They're excited about all the rides. So it's all very realistic. My daughter Alice, she had a go at making our family in a different computer game, The Sims. This is a game that's still very popular, although it's upgraded a couple of levels since then. You can determine what people look like, and you can even determine their personalities and their wishes, their aims in life. Now, here's my wife Enid. Alice made her a little bit younger than she is at the moment. Well, this was back in 2006, so, maybe she actually did look like that. And you can see her fears, and you can see her wants. She wants her daughters to do well. And here's Alice, sitting on a swing, looking into the distance dreamily. That's realistic. And there's Joanne playing the piano, very typical, though not usually in the garden. Alice was able to program her own personality traits as well as her looks. So how sloppy, how neat, or how shy, or outgoing, or lazy, or active, or serious, or playful she is. And she did do it with some realism because, she isn't very tidy, and she's still very playful. She couldn't set her fitness and her job prospects for that sim of hers. That depends on how much that sim does exercise and how much it studies, just like in real life. Now, those sims, they don't do what they're told necessarily, they just act through life. You can influence them, you can tell them to go to bed, you can tell them to exercise or to paint or something like that. You can also tell them to get on with something interesting when they should be catching a school bus or when they should be going to work, so you can get them into trouble or you can get them fired. You can help them decide whether they're going to talk to someone, whether they're going to flirt with someone, whether they're going to kiss them. And as a result, they might get a slap on the face or they might get an amorous response, depending on the other sim. It's quite remarkable. And if you don't tell them to do anything, they'll just get on with life. They'll get on with cooking food, having a shower, going to bed, going to work, eating, sleeping, loving, marrying. All without being told. I think this game is so popular because we're almost like God. We're playing out our God-given role, being made in the image of God, of being creative and also helping other people, helping them, guiding them, hopefully in a good way. But bad things can happen in these worlds. I must admit that I drowned one of those sims. I was doing some work on the swimming pool. I took away the ladder and the poor sim couldn't swim forever. And you can make shoddy rides in the roller coaster world so that they crash and the little peeps get injured or die. There's one point where I was redesigning my roller coaster world, and I took away one of the bridges over a path, and there were still some peeps on it, and they fell off the bridge and died. Or sims can accidentally set fire to their kitchen while they're cooking, and if they can't get out of the house, then they can die. Bad things can happen. So as an experiment, my daughter made a park she called Eden. Now in Eden, she made it perfect. It's full of flowers, trees, pristine paths. She put in a few food outlets, but she didn't add any rides. And then she let some peeps in. And the peeps wandered around, and she just sat back and to see what would happen. And after a while, you saw what the peeps were thinking. They were thinking, I'm tired, I'm bored, I want to go home. But she hadn't added any exits, so they couldn't get out. They were stuck there, just wandering around. And then she let it run a bit longer, and she noticed the park benches were getting vandalized. And the paths were getting littered. And the peeps were messing up the perfect park. And then the seagulls came along to eat the litter, and then the seagulls attacked the peeps. And some frustrated peeps, they were pushing other peeps, and you could see what they were saying. They were shouting at them, "Get out of my way! Eden was turning into the real world. Now we have a problem. How are we going to help those peeps to behave better? Perhaps you could write some rules with punishments if they don't keep them. Or perhaps you could write them a handbook with lots of examples of how they should be living. Or perhaps you can find some peeps who can hear what you say when you're typing into the computer. Okay, you've probably caught on to what I'm saying. I'm talking about how God reaches us. God gave Moses rules. God gave us the Bible, a handbook with lots of examples how to live. God talked to prophets who then told us what God was saying. And we didn't listen much to any of them. The question is, would you go to the extreme that God went to fix the mess? Because God decided to step down into the mess and become a peep. Sorry, a man. I'm getting carried away with the illustration. But consider, would you step down and become a peep in order to help those peeps sort out their mess? Well, I suppose it depends how much you care about them and how much it would cost you. After all, they're just moving pictures in a computer. They don't matter much, so why bother? But on the other hand, it might be interesting going into a computer and doing things. But hold on, there's a big downside you may not have thought of. When Jesus stepped down into our world, he didn't arrive with superpowers. To insert himself successfully, he had to be born as a baby, as a stupid baby. Now, I say stupid because, hey, all babies are stupid. They have to learn from nothing. And Jesus had to do that too, if he was a real human. As a real human, he had to forget everything. So when Jesus was asked about the end of the world, he had to admit he didn't know when it was going to be. He said, I don't know, but my Father in heaven, he knows. He knew more than all those around him because he was in communication constantly with his Father, but he could only hold as much information as a human brain can hold. He could do things that other people couldn't do, but only because he worked in perfect harmony with his Father and prayed for miracles. He was only human. He could only do as much as a human can. And that is the wonder of Jesus, that he was human and God at the same time. I tested a translation program by giving it this passage from the beginning of John in German from Luther's Bible and seeing how well it would translate into English. And it worked very well until it got to verse 14, when instead of the word became flesh, it translated the word became meat. At first I laughed at the stupid simplicity of this translation program, but then I thought about it. This is exactly correct. That's what John meant. He meant quite literally, God became meat. We've got too used to the word flesh, so that it's now turned into a theological term. But it's meat. Incarnation. A carnivore is a meat eater. Incarnation, into meat. That's what Jesus did. He took on that squishy, smelly, weak, dirty form of a human. And having done so, he descended down to the bottom. Paul can't describe the enormity of what Jesus did without poetry. He says, he made himself nothing taking on the very nature of a slave. And being made in human likeness, being found in the nature of a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. When Jesus descended into the world, he faced the danger of pain, suffering, and death. And seeing as he didn't have any superpowers, he couldn't simply avoid them. He rose from death, but this wasn't because he was special. It's because he was the first. Jesus was the experiment. Jesus was the firstborn of the dead. That is, he's the first human to rise and not the last. His resurrection was the prototype, the proof of concept, showing it could be done. And thanks to him being the test pilot for that process, we can all do the same. As John said in verse 12, to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God. In verse 13, born of God. That is, they too would be able to start a life that is not going to end with death. But one last thought before you decide to dive in and become a peep, dive into the computer and save them. Consider this. Will you ever be the same again? When Jesus rose from death, did he shrug off his human body? Did he shrug off his humanity? There's hints in the New Testament that Jesus became irreversibly a human. In 1 Timothy, there's one God and there's one mediator between God and man, the man, Jesus Christ. He's still a man. Jesus is still human. And as far as we can tell, he's not superhuman. Oh, sure, when he was resurrected, he could turn up in a locked room, but he still ate food. And he cooked breakfast for the other disciples by lighting a fire. So he had a stomach, not an atomic generator. And he needs to light a fire. He couldn't zap it with flames out from his fingers. He was the firstborn of the dead, so we will be like him when we're resurrected. In our new bodies, we'll be also able to go into locked rooms, but also eat. We shall be like him because we will see him as he is. We will be like him, but that means he is still like us. He's a resurrected human. Jesus can know everything because he's in perfect communion with his Father. But he can't know everything at once unless a human resurrected brain can. Jesus can do anything because he can ask his Father to do it on his behalf. But he can't do everything by himself unless resurrected humans can. Whatever abilities he has, we will have, because we will be like him. But that also means he's now like us, and it appears to be irreversible. So now, go back to that imaginary situation where you are going to save the peeps or not save them. Are you sure you want to do it? Because you may suffer. You may die as a peep. And once you become a peep, you may end up staying a peep forever in some way. In that case, the conclusion you come to is, nope, it is not worth it. They are not worth it. This is the most remarkable thing about Jesus' descent to humanity. He thought it was worth it. The mess, the stink, the suffering, even death. And after that, he gets to stay stuck as a human for eternity. How could anything be worth that sacrifice? The answer is in John 3:16. That's how much he loves us. Thank you.